Is it ready to rock and roll? Order. I will be calling Jonathan Edwards to move the motion, and then I will call the Minister to respond. There will be no opportunity for the member in charge for a wind-up, as he knows he's an experienced member, as is the convention in these 30-minute debates. I do suspect, however, you will get a number of interventions. Jonathan Edwards.
Mr Paisley. I beg to move that this House has considered the future of farming in Wales and the UK. And can I start by saying it's an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Paisley, and to have the opportunity to raise the concerns that have been expressed in rural Wales in particular. But seeing that there's an honourable turnout from members from across the UK, all the constituent parts, I suspect that we'll hear about the concerns of other farmers across the UK. Feelings are running at fever pitch in Wales, Mr Paisley, and last week a mass protest converged on the capital city, Cardiff. For the rural heartlands of Wales, Cardiff is not the easiest place to get to. My honourable friend from Arfon will attest that it's easier to get to London than to get to Cardiff from Carnarvon.
Easier to get to Dublin?
Well, even easier to get to Dublin. The turnout was quite extraordinary and shows the strength of feelings that have erupted over recent weeks. And I was listening to the Wales podcast on the BBC on the way down on the train over the weekend, and they said it was the largest ever demonstration the Senate has ever seen. And I think that's a testament to the strength of feeling in rural Wales at the moment. Whilst not coming from farming stock directly, my father and his brother were raised on Fosafine farm in Capel Dewi following the death of their father from TB. There he got involved in the local young farmers movement, and his best friend was David Woods, who farmed Weineraddod in Cwmfelin Mynach in the west of Carmarthenshire near Whitland. Some of my fondest memories as a child was visiting the Woods family at their farm on weekends and watching my father and Mr Woods milk the herd and helping out as I got a bit older. I witnessed firsthand the unwavering dedication of our farmers and grew a huge appreciation for their work and their pride they feel in being food producers for the general population. The pressures farmers work under is quite considerable, open to hugely fluctuating costs and prices whilst their payments largely flatline. They work on extremely small margins. One of my first meetings after being elected was with a dairy farmer when he explained the huge financial differences for his business based on a 1p increase or decrease in the price of milk. The inflationary pressures squeezing our economy are hitting farmers particularly hard, with skyrocketing input costs severely impacting their incomes. Last year I received a justifiably angry message from a constituent complaining that fertiliser costs had doubled in less than the space of 12 months. He was talking about having to drastically cut back on production. These inflationary pressures have driven up costs across the industry, yet farmers haven't had the option of passing these costs on to consumers due to their position in the supply chain. Mental health has become a major issue in the agricultural community. Suicide rates are far higher than the general population. Economic pressures undoubtedly play a role, as does the insular nature of the job, the relentless hours and the demanding schedules. A recent survey revealed that over a third of farmers experience clinical depression and nearly half struggle with anxiety. I have been there myself on many occasions, Mr Paisley, and it's absolutely no joke. Being in that state of mind whilst working in an extremely dangerous workplace obviously makes matters even more serious. I know of a farmer who has had his struggles over the years. Recently, he walked into a slurry pit before snapping out and phoning the emergency services, who thankfully got there in time. Mental health in farming should be a priority for policymakers, and I pay tribute to the charities such as DPJ Foundation, based in Carmarthen, for their work in providing advocacy and raising the profile of these issues. Agriculture, from an economic perspective, is comparatively more important to the Welsh economy than the UK as a whole. Take out farming and other sectors will be severely hit. To further make the point, NFU Cymru recently hosted a meeting with over 100 stakeholders worried about the new sustainable farming scheme of the Welsh Government. There were a wide range of organisations and companies represented, including agricultural contractors, vets, academic institutions, farming charities, legal firms and trade associations, as well as major meat, milk and food service companies based and operating in Wales.
Thank you for bringing this forward. He's absolutely right to highlight the issues for Wales, but indeed for the whole of the United Kingdom as well. Does the Honourable Member agree that along with the many issues facing farmers, UK-wide, the support for farming community is needed to ensure that we are providing opportunities for those not from farming backgrounds alone, but to give opportunity to those outside it to realise that there is potential for a fulfilling career in the countryside, and perhaps we need to push for this vocation as passionately as we do for NHS or indeed even for engineering?
I'm extremely grateful to that very valuable contribution. I think when I go on in my speech, one of the things I'm going to be talking about is that we need to be, the agricultural community need to perceive as if we want to work with them, as opposed to being unsympathetic towards them. And I think that is especially, unfortunately, the case in Wales at the moment. Returning to my point about the NFU gathering, Mr Paisley, following the meeting, NFU Cymru President Aled Jones said, and I'll quote him, "The food and farming supply chain is an £8 billion industry in Wales and employs some 233,000 people in Wales. It's Wales's biggest employer. As a sector, we are completely interlinked with each part of the supply chain relying on the other for their viability. A productive, progressive and profitable Welsh farming sector is essential to the wider supply chain. Farmers spend around £1.4 billion annually on products such as feed, fertiliser, veterinary and medicines, farm machinery and contract work. The produce from our farms is processed and sold in retail and food services markets in Wales, across the UK and globally." That's the end of the quote. You get the impression that policymakers, returning to the point of the intervention, that policymakers at Welsh level in particular view our farmers as some sort of economic burden. Their mindset needs to be turned around, and a key part of that is accepting the anchor status of farming for the whole rural economy. With pleasure.
I thank the Honourable giving way, congratulate him on securing the debate, and agree with very much of all the points that he's made. And he'll be aware that just as in Wales, in much of East Anglia, 1 in 8 jobs in rural communities are linked to agriculture, food and drink and the wider supply chain. But I wondered, in terms of supporting the agricultural sector, whether there's more that could be done in terms of public sector procurement and having rules introduced by the government in the UK government, but also the devolved governments, to have minimum requirement to purchase food in our hospitals and our schools from our local farmers.
Well, I'm extremely grateful for that intervention, and I think there's an added bonus of such a policy, of course, because we will be providing in hospitals and schools high-quality food, and that's something, of course, we should be aspiring to achieve as policymakers.
I'm most grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Does he not agree with me that what is going on in Wales, the real disappointment faced by Welsh farmers in the Labour government provided by the Welsh Assembly, does he not agree that this is the gypsy's warning for farming across the whole of the UK, that if we were unlucky enough to get a Labour government, what's happening in Wales would happen in the rest of the UK, and not even a Labour MP here to defend the Welsh government? It's a shocker.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for his passion and his support for the farming industry. You know, I don't want to write his election leaflet for him, but I certainly will be concentrating on Welsh Government policy further on in my speech. Earlier this month, Mr Paisley, 3,000 farmers converged on Carmarthen Mart under the protest banner "Digon yw digon," which translates "Enough is enough." I pay tribute to my constituents Gary Howells and Aled Rees for mobilising so many farmers in my home county, and indeed protests have been erupting across Wales and England. As an aspiring historian in a past life, I have to mention that these massive protest meetings have parallels with the Rebecca rioters' mass gathering at Mynydd Sullen near Pontyberem in the summer of 1843. I had to get it in, Mr Paisley. What we're witnessing today, however, is colossal discontent in the agricultural community. And thankfully, organisers and the unions have done a great job ensuring that the matters have remained peaceful and within the law. Much of this anger has been growing since the EU referendum, as farmers have witnessed the destructive approach taken by policymakers to the development of post-Brexit agricultural policy. There is no doubt that leaving the European Union has been a disaster for Welsh farming. They were promised sunlit uplands by the Leave campaign, but have been let down. In the post-Brexit trade deals that have been signed, the interests of our farmers have been sold down the river by the UK government. I do acknowledge that there seems to have been a slight change of approach with the current deals, such as the one with Canada, where this is too little too late in relation to some of the previous deals. The Welsh Government calculates that for the period 2021-25, rural support funding will be £243 million less than had we been under EU farming support policy, and this figure doesn't account for inflation. The difficulty faced by the Welsh Government in managing an overall budget declining in real terms perhaps explains some of the unfavourable policy approaches we have seen to agriculture over the last few years. If the UK Government have left themselves open to the accusations that they've neglected agriculture, the Welsh Government is open to accusations of hostility.
Well, I congratulate him on securing this debate, and he's making a fine speech. He points to the double whammy facing Welsh farming. It's not only Brexit and the disaster which has happened subsequently, and of course the Canada deal is far from settled. There's a sort of cruel pantomime going on at the moment, as we shall see later on in the main chamber, but also, of course, the incompetence and the lack of understanding and listening from the Welsh Labour government, as witnessed by the very large protest last week. Clearly, we need to change.
Well, I'm extremely grateful to him for the intervention. And I think his point about the Welsh Government is particularly well made. You know, I don't know personally of any farmer that votes for the Labour Party, and I suppose you can probably understand why the Labour Party take the approach that they do. But it's absolutely disastrous for agriculture, really, to have a government which I think is open to the accusation of being hostile towards them. One of the most emotionally difficult meetings I've had as an MP was on location at a farm that has been struck down with bovine TB, Mr Paisley. It's difficult to explain the mental health impact on those affected. Earlier this month, Ffermio, an agricultural programme on S4C, unmasked those horrors graphically on the Castell Howell farm of Mr and Mrs Davies in Capel Isaacs, in my constituency. The family had to witness their cattle herd shot in front of them, one by one. It was absolutely harrowing for the viewer and utterly despairing for the family. It has become a tipping point for the emotional outpouring we are witnessing in rural Wales at the moment. It was an incredible piece of filmmaking by the Ffermio programme team, led by my constituents Elen Llywelyn and Maynard Howells. The failure of the Welsh Government to get to grips with bovine TB and the continued faith in a policy of destroying cattle herds has become a perfect metaphor for the unsympathetic environment farmers face from their own government. I'm glad that last week the Welsh Government committed to reviewing their policy on farm slaughter, but there should be a wholesale review of policy, including dealing with TB in wildlife. To compound matters, the Welsh Government partnership parties have acted with blatant disregard in relation to changes to proposed school terms and their potential impact upon the Royal Welsh Show, one of the marquee events in the Welsh national calendar. Proposed school term changes could see the show fall outside the traditional summer holidays, with the organisers warning they will face a £1 million plus shortfall, making the event unviable. Last week, the Minister hosted an event by the Royal Welsh Agricultural Society in Committee Room 12 in Parliament, in the very room where the idea to form the society came to fruition to celebrate 120 years since that initial meeting. England has lost its Royal Show, and we now in Wales have the most successful, if not even the largest, agricultural event in Europe. Yet the event operates on small margins, and a £1 million operational loss could be fatal. The Welsh Government needs to sit back and think its policy through and make sure the Royal Welsh and the National Eisteddfod Board are protected. The always blanket approach to nitrate pollution by the Welsh Government has irked farmers further due to its disproportionality and the estimated cost of £400 million to the industry. Everybody acknowledges the need to reduce agricultural pollution. However, why the Welsh Government feels the need for a sledgehammer approach is beyond me. Coleg Sir Gar Gelli Aur Agricultural College in my constituency has been pioneering slurry treatment technology, which essentially separates the waste into two reusable products by separating the water. Water can then re-enter the environment safely or reuse on the farm, with the remnants being a dried product that can be used as fertiliser with little pollution risk. Instead of coming down on farmers like a ton of bricks, why isn't the Welsh Government providing grants for farming businesses to upgrade their waste systems? This could be done on a collaborative basis amongst farmers. One system could service a number of farming businesses and would potentially provide an income source out of a waste product. And it ticks all the boxes, Mr Paisley. There is huge innovation in Wales. Aled Davies and his company Prewix, also based in my constituency, is pioneering work in using natural bacteria to disinfect chicken and cattle sheds from ammonia pollution instead of chemicals. The results that I have seen look very impressive, and I was delighted to receive an email last week from Mr Davies saying that he'd secured a research contract from the Welsh Government, so I'll give him a bit of credit for that. This shows what can be achieved if the Welsh Government works with the sector. Wales can pioneer change, which unfortunately then brings me to the new sustainable farming scheme for agricultural payments, which the Welsh Government has proposed. Its own assessments indicate the scale of job losses in the agricultural sector would be around double the expected steel job losses in Port Talbot. The new policy, unamended, would also lead to a loss of £190 million to farm incomes and 11% reduction in livestock numbers. The knock-on effect on the wider rural economy will be catastrophic, and that's the Welsh Government's own figures. The knock-on effect on the wider rural economy will be catastrophic. Page 8 of the partnership agreement between Labour and Plaid Cymru notes the SFS as a commitment in which both parties will develop the new agricultural support regime. And I think it's worth reading out the whole section of the partnership agreement so that it's on the record, Mr Paisley. And, yes, of course.
Just on the point, Mr. Paisley, of the support for farmers. Yesterday I was speaking to a former president of the Aberdeen Angus Society, Mr. Finlay Munro, a farmer in my constituency. He made the point, which I found quite thought-provoking, was that when we talk about carbon sequestration, we're not really giving grassland its full value. And if that could be worked into the equation, that might be a support mechanism for our farmers. And does the honourable gentleman who's making an excellent speech agree that government should look at that?
Well, I'm very grateful for that intervention, and indeed that is the criticism coming from farmers in Wales to the SFS. And again, the Welsh Government made a statement last week, and they said they were going to review this. And I think that's a positive step forward. I think it's definitely in response to the protest. But reviewing is one thing. What we want to see is policy implementation. So I think it's a point extremely well made, and a point that's made often to me by my farmers in Carmarthenshire. Just to quote the partnership agreement on the SFS, it says, and I quote, "To introduce a transition period as we reform the system of farm payments so stability payments will continue to be a feature of the sustainable farming scheme during and beyond the Senedd term. We will agree the longer-term arrangements for Welsh agriculture, recognising the particular needs of family farms and acknowledging ecological, sustainable local food production." It pains me to say this, Mr Paisley, and I'm sure my honourable friend is not going to be too happy with what I'm about to say, but it seems to me that Plaid Cymru have been completely outmanoeuvred by the Labour Party in the partnership agreement. They've effectively been led down an endless 20-mile-per-hour road to nowhere by Labour. There is a clear case that the farming community has a vital role in helping the Welsh Government meet its environmental targets, especially in terms of carbon sequestration, returning to the point of the honourable gentleman. The alternative is letting the speculators buy up Welsh agricultural holdings, as has been happening, and planting productive Welsh farming land with trees. However, as always, the Welsh Government will be better advised taking farmers with them on a journey as opposed to dictating and imposing. And just to reiterate the point I made in my response to the honourable gentleman, there has been a statement, now there is going to be a review, but what we really want to see is action. My understanding in Scotland is that the SNP aim to enable farmers to continue to access a level of basic payments. And this seems to me to be a better approach. In Wales, we would do well to rethink the SFS and look at what Scotland are doing and meet the demands of the farming unions for a universal baseline payment. As my constituent, the President of the Farmers Union of Wales, Ian Rickman, has said, and I quote, "The reality is that if the scheme remains in its current form and if the modelling report is correct, farmers' uptake will be minimal and everyone will lose out. Welsh farmers, the environment, the public and ultimately the Welsh Government. There is a real worry that even under a scenario where scheme payments come nowhere near to compensating for the loss of the basic payment scheme, there will be some farm businesses that will have no choice other than to participate in the SFS. This will no doubt place further pressures on farmers' workload and mental health. The sustainable farming scheme must be accessible by all and provide long-term stability for farming businesses and the wider rural economy that relies upon agriculture. The SFS needs to provide a meaningful income stream which properly rewards farmers and underpins the importance of a high-quality food supply chain produced here in Wales." That's the end of the quote. The deadline for the final stages of the Welsh Government's consultation on the SFS finished later this week, and I'll be sending them a copy of this speech. As ministers and negotiators on behalf of Plaid Cymru and the Government consider the response, I urge them to tread very carefully before announcing their final plans. Conceding reviews is one thing, but what actually matters is the policy environment that will be implemented, and unless concerns are addressed, the protests we have witnessed to date will be magnified.
I'm grateful to him. Can I just say that he does a slight disservice to my party by lumping Plaid Cymru in with the Welsh Labour government. We do have an agreement, as he knows full well, having been involved in discussions on this in past times, but that is far from being jointly responsible together as a coalition, as some parties have tried to allege recently.
Well, I'm grateful to that intervention, because that's a lot of the public discourse around the protests have been. But I read out the actual partnership agreend. So there's a negotiation going on, and he's aware that his colleague in Arfon is the lead negotiator, and I think she's been blindsided by the Labour government. He'll like this bit now, though. So, okay. Well, R.S. Thomas, one of our greatest national poets, would often portray in his work how farmers on the land of Wales are one and the same. I have to be honest that I find the culture war tactics that are used against farmers difficult to comprehend. As R.S. observed, nobody understands nature better than our farmers and the intrinsic link between the preservation of nature, industrial toil and food production. Everyone understands that practices will have to evolve, but the role of policymakers must be to lead the industry on a journey that they can buy into as one that safeguards farming as opposed to one they consider as one that aims to undermine them. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
So the question is that the House has considered farming in Wales and the United Kingdom. Minister Faye Jones.
Thank you, Mr Posey. It's lovely to see you in the chair this morning. I know with your constituency this is a matter of interest to you as well. But I firstly want to congratulate the Honourable Member for Carmarthen East and Dynevor for securing today's debate and to thank the honourable members who have contributed so far. May I say how pleased I am to see colleagues from right across the United Kingdom, because all too often farming in Wales does not get the attention it needs, and so I'm delighted to see that so many people have contributed in.
Where's Labour?
Well, my honourable friend from a sedentary position does make a very good point that there is a startling gap of Labour members in this debate, but I will come back to that in just a moment. My honourable friend for Carmarthen East and Dynevor drew attention to many of the key pressures facing farmers at the moment. And I particularly want to commend him for talking about mental health and join him in his praise of the DPJ Foundation, who I know. I have been, my constituency adjoins his, and I have been to a farmer in 100 House in my constituency who pointed out the beam at the top of the barn that he contemplated using when things got so desperately bad. I'm grateful to say that with the support of the DPJ Foundation, he is worlds away from that place now, and I very much credit them for all the work that they have done to support farmers, because now is a very difficult time. And we know that farmers are used to working in incredibly difficult conditions, whether it's the weather, whether it's a difficult lambing, whether it's poor global prices, whatever it might be, farmers are often at the bottom of the chain. And it is right that we take every opportunity to thank them, not only for what they do in producing our food, but stewarding our environment as well. We simply wouldn't have the incredible rolling hills of mid-Wales without them. So I am incredibly proud of them, and it gives me another opportunity to restate just how much we owe to farmers, the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. I will just touch on, there was much in the Honourable Gentleman's speech that I agreed with, and sadly I don't have time to talk through everything. I will just gently challenge his points on trade, which he brought up in the main chamber yesterday. Yes, I'll give away briefly.
Basically, I'm tempted to intervene because of the mention of farmers across the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. It is of interest that there are no Scottish National Party members here, and I have to tell you, again, talking to the same gentleman I was talking to, Mr Finlay Munro, that it's the lack of forward planning. We don't know where we are in terms of what's going to be environmental, what's going to be wilding, what's not. Is it hedgerows or is it feeding the nation? And that's something I think we need to be very, very wary of.
Minister? The Honourable Gentleman is entirely right. It's not a political point to say that members are not here, because all members from all parties ought to be engaging and listening to farmers at the moment. I think it's absolutely right to point out that certainty is what farmers need. I remember in my maiden speech I talked about how farmers can withstand drought, flood, government interference if they are able to plan, if they are given the certainty, and sadly that is very much lacking from farmers in Wales, and I believe in Scotland we need to see a little bit more detail there. So I would urge all members to come to the table. But just to return to the Honourable Gentleman's points on trade, and he refers to the Australia trade deal, and I would push back gently against some of the language that he used there. There are safeguards within the Australia trade deal that protect farmers right across the United Kingdom from any kind of dumping, and I wish that would get a little bit more attention. I give way.
Very briefly, I don't know if she's met the Australian and the New Zealand ambassador, but I have, along with the Plaid Cymru group, and I can inform her that both ambassadors were delighted and slightly puzzled at the wonderful deal that they achieved with the United Kingdom, and slightly puzzled as well as to what we were getting out of it.
Minister?
Well, I will just carry on with the point that I was making about the protections that are in the trade deals. I understand that Plaid Cymru is very quick to talk down trade deals. In fact, I'm not sure they've ever supported a single one. But there are a number of safeguards within both FTAs which protect agriculture. So I think that there are huge reasons to be positive, not least the fact that the Australia trade deal brings us access to the CPTPP, which is a hugely promising market for Welsh agricultural products. But as I have not yet even started on my speech, let me try and return to some of the points that I was going to highlight. The Honourable Gentleman is right, I think, to point out some of the issues with the sustainable farming scheme. He used the phrase digon or digon, and we in Wales understand what farmers mean when they say that. They have had enough. They have had enough of feeling as though they are not being listened to. And I was really disappointed to hear a Labour member in Prime Minister's questions last week refer to some of the protesting farmers as extremists who are sharing conspiracy theories online. Now, if Labour members were willing to listen to them, they would understand that they are raising legitimate grievances about the future viability of their businesses, whether it's bovine TB, which the Honourable Gentleman raised incredibly well. That is an example of an issue where the Welsh Government has set its face against farming. In England, we introduced a badger cull in 2013, and I pay credit to the Liberal Democrats for their determination to see that through as part of the coalition government. In England, we introduced that in 2013, and we've seen statistics which show that the rate of bovine TB is reducing. But in Wales, we have no such support. In England, we are being led by the science. In Wales, I'm afraid that is being ignored. The sustainable farming scheme is, I'm afraid to say, frankly, unworkable. We had a long debate on the floor of the House last night where we talked about some of the challenging elements of that scheme. Farmers will be required, I'm afraid to say, to carry out 6 online training courses each and every year. They will be required to submit data on the amount of medicines that they use in their flock or herd, the rate of lamb loss, the data on soil, worm numbers, seed receipts. It is simply unworkable. And that's before we even get on to the 2 headline items of the sustainable farming scheme. The condition that farmers have to remove 10% of land for planting trees and a further 10% for habitat construction. Given the global uncertainty that we're currently facing, I feel it is madness that the Welsh Government wants to reduce the amount of land available for food production. We should be boosting our food security, not reducing it. Mr Paisley, I will just try and wrap up my remarks in the last couple of minutes, but the Honourable Gentleman is right to point out that the Sustainable Farming Scheme will, according to the Welsh Government's own analysis, cost 5,500 jobs on farm. That's not to say anything about the impact on the wider supply chain. And I have a huge amount of time and respect for the Honourable Gentleman from Arfon. But he criticised me in his intervention of the Honourable Gentleman for the fact that the Welsh Conservative Party has been pointing out that it is Plaid Cymru's support for Welsh Labour over the last few years. Now, if it looks like a coalition, sounds like a coalition, smells like a coalition, I don't really know why the Honourable Gentleman wants to call it a cooperation agreement, but the fact is, this is in Plaid Cymru's hands. To make the Sustainable Farming Scheme go away, all they need to do is vote against their budget, vote against the Welsh Government's budget, and force them to go back to the table, listen to farmers and make improvements to this scheme. Yeah. Were they to withdraw from their cooperation agreement, or coalition, as I call it, they would be able to get this off the table, which is what all farmers want to see. They want to deliver for the environment. They want to deliver for food production. They want their government listening to them. And Plaid Cymru has the power to make this happen. So I would urge the Honourable Gentleman to hear the message that is coming from Westminster Hall and the Chamber today, that his party have the power to do this. And I very much hope they do. So with that, with a final minute, Mr Paisley, I do just want to thank the Honourable Gentleman once again for bringing this debate to the House. The importance of food production and environmental delivery must go hand in hand. And it is absolutely incumbent on all of us here to speak up for the important industries that power our nation, whether that's steel, as the Honourable Gentleman pointed out, or whether that's farming, which is a historic, dynamic, proud industry which powers rural Wales. I have a few seconds left, so I will commend him for his comments on the Royal Welsh Agricultural Show, which is the largest show in Europe. I'm sorry to contradict my honourable friend from North Herefordshire, but farming is the beating heart of rural Wales, and I'm incredibly proud to represent so many farmers, and I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his work in doing the same.
Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 2:30. Order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.